Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Susmel and I'm a Writing Center consultant and history major here at the University of South Dakota. Today I'm going to show you how to format your paper and sources according to the Chicago Manual of Style 16th edition using Microsoft Word 2016. The paper you see in front of you now was generously donated by a student, and we stripped it of all its previous formatting for the purpose of this explainer video. Now, as I said, the guidelines and instructions I give will adhere strictly to the Chicago Manual of Style 16th edition. It's possible that your instructor may have given alternate instructions for a few of the elements of Chicago we will discuss, so if the instructions given by your professor contradict my own, you should probably go with what your professor advised. First, let's make sure that everyone has the same formatting options and tools in front of them. Click on the View tab at the top of the screen, and make sure that the box surrounding Print Layout is clicked. You'll also want to select the box labeled Ruler, which will prompt rulers to appear along the top and left side of your pages. This will help us make sure our margins and indentations are correctly set. Chicago instructs us to use 1-inch margins on all sides of the paper. 1 inch on all sides is likely set as the default already, but to double check, let's click on the Layout tab and then on the Margins button. In the drop-down menu that appears, you should see a Normal option with 1 inch listed on all sides. If you don't see a normal option, you can click on the Custom Margins menu item at the bottom of the drop-down menu. A window marked Page Setup should appear, and you'll be able to manually set the top, left, bottom, and right margins to 1 inch from here. Before accepting the changes by hitting OK, make sure that you've selected Apply to Whole Document from the drop-down menu at the bottom. Now hit OK. Next, let's discuss the formatting of the body of the text. For academic research papers, Chicago instructs students to double space and left justify their body text. To do this, you must first select all the text in the document. First, let's click on the Home tab, and then Select on the far right of the screen. From the drop-down menu that appears, we'll choose Select All. The selected text should appear with a gray background. Once your text is highlighted, click on the Home tab, and then click on the small launch window in the bottom right corner of the Paragraph section. This button should launch a window labeled Paragraph. From here, you'll be able to double space your document by selecting the Double from the drop-down menu below Spacing. You'll also want to make sure no extra space appears in between paragraphs by setting the Before and After settings to the left of the line spacing menu to 0. While we're in this window, we can also set our indentations by selecting First Line from the drop-down menu below Special and making sure that 0.5 appears in the box to the right. Hit OK to save your changes and close the paragraph window. While the 16th edition of Chicago doesn't require the use of a specific font, they do recommend the use of Times New Roman. You can change your font to Times New Roman by clicking on the Home tab and selecting it from the Font drop-down menu in the top left corner of the Font section. This menu lists fonts in alphabetical order, so you may have to scroll down to the T's. If you want, you can also select a font by typing into the top of the drop-down menu. Chicago Style mandates that writers use a font no bigger than 12 and no smaller than 10 point. You can change your font size using the drop-down menu immediately to the right of the font box. Now that we've completed formatting the body of the text, we can deselect the text by clicking anywhere on the page. Next, let's create our title page. When using Chicago Style, writers are instructed to include a title page that contains the paper's title, author, class, and date of submission. To start, let's insert a new page using Word's page break function. Click your cursor at the beginning of the first paragraph, and then select the Insert tab, and click on the Page Break button within the Pages section. You should now have a blank page at the beginning of your document with only a title at the top. Chicago Style recommends that you list your title centered a third of the way down the page and in all caps. First, let's make sure that Word hasn't automatically inserted an indentation in front of our title. Click immediately to the left of the first word of your title, and hit the backspace key. Then hit Enter 5 to 6 times. Next, select your entire title by clicking to the far left of the line with your title, and then select the center icon in the Paragraph section of the Home tab. This should center your title in the middle of the page with equal space on both sides. Now, capitalize each letter in your title by selecting the Case drop-down menu and clicking on the third item, labeled Uppercase. Chicago also requires us to add the author, class, and date on the title page. To do this, let's click to the right of the title, hit Enter 8 to 10 more times, then type the author's name, the class name, and the due date, all on separate lines. Finally, let's add page numbers for the paper. Unlike an MLA or APA, Chicago does not require a special title or name in the header, simply a page number in the upper right-hand corner. Unfortunately, unlike an MLA or APA, the Chicago Manual of Style tells us not to number the title page, so we have to go through a couple extra steps. First, double-click on the very top of your title page. This should open a special Header and Footer Tools tab on the ribbon at the top of the screen. Make sure that the box for Different First Page is unchecked within the Options section of the ribbon. Next, we'll click on the Page Number drop-down menu in the upper left-hand corner of the screen and select Format Page Numbers. A dialog box labeled Page Number Format should appear. Under the page numbering heading, make sure that Start At is selected and type 0 in the box. Click OK, and then select the Page Number drop-down menu again. However, now we'll select the top of page item, and then select option Plain Number 3 from the side menu. The page numbers, starting with 0 on the title page, should now appear in the upper right-hand corner. Now, all we have to do is remove 0 from the title page. To do this, simply recheck the box next to Different First Page in the Options section of the special Header and Footer Tools tab. Now that we've formatted the document and inserted page numbers in the title page, let's discuss the formatting requirements of Chicago citations. Chicago Style utilizes two documentation styles. In this video, we'll discuss Chicago's Notes Bibliography method, which is the most commonly used. If your instructor has asked that you use Chicago's other documentation style, the author date method, check out our other Chicago Manual of Style video, which we've linked to in the video description. Chicago's Notes Bibliography documentation method is made up of two parts, the notes and the bibliography. We'll start by looking at the formatting and content of Chicago Style notes. In Chicago Style, notes are used in the same way that in-text citations are used in APA, MLA, and other citation styles, to show the reader where the author learned or obtained a given piece of information. Notes, like in-text citations, are used not only when directly quoting text from another document or author, but also when paraphrasing or referring to information obtained from an outside source. In Chicago Style, notes come in two forms: footnotes, which appear at the bottom of the page with the referenced information, and endnotes, which appear at the end of the document. The authors of Chicago Manual of Style leave this choice for the author and do not indicate a preference for either, but your professor likely will have indicated whichever he or she prefers, so be sure to check out your instructor's formatting guidelines carefully. If your instructor doesn't list a preference, then the choice is up to you. I prefer footnotes because they allow me to double-check the footnote information quickly as I revise and proofread, but some prefer endnotes because they make it easier to judge the true length of the document and to prevent interruptions in the flow of the paper. At the moment, this document uses footnotes, but in Word, it's very easy to switch back and forth from footnotes to endnotes. If you'd like to switch between one or the other, click on the References tab, and then click on the Footnotes Launch button in the bottom right corner of the Footnotes section. A window labeled Footnote and Endnote should appear. Now, select the button for either footnotes or endnotes. Make sure that, for footnotes, bottom of the page is selected from the drop-down menu. For endnotes, ensure that End of Document is selected. Once you've selected your preference, hit Convert, and then select OK from the window that appears. Then, make sure that numbers rather than letters or Roman numerals are selected from the numbering format drop-down menu, and click Apply. Note that, since I've converted my footnotes to endnotes, all my notes now appear at the very end of my document. Now, let's look at how to construct a footnote for two of the most common used document types, books and journal articles. Let's begin with a book. I've removed a previously included citation so I can walk you through the insertion and construction process step by step. First, insert your cursor at the end of the sentence containing the information you're citing. Your footnote and endnote marking will always come at the end of the sentence. Now, click on the References tab, and then click on the Insert Endnote, or Insert Footnote, depending on your preference. Your cursor should automatically jump down to the note listing at either the bottom of the page or the end of the document. When citing a monograph in a foot or endnote, Chicago instructs us to first list the author's name. Note that, unlike in the bibliography we will discuss in a few minutes, in a note, the author's last name does not come before his or her first name. Next, we will list the title of the book. Use a comma to separate the author's name from the title. In Chicago style, the book name is italicized or slanted, so before we begin typing, click on the italics icon in the font section of the Home tab. Your flashing cursor should now appear slanted. Type the title of the book. Next, Chicago instructs us to include the publication information. Click on the italics icon again to turn off italics. And then, in parentheses, type the city of publication, followed by a colon, the publisher, a comma, and the year of publication. All this information can typically be found at the front of the book. Finally, type the page number of the book where you found the information you are citing. If the information is found in two or more concurrent pages, you can indicate this with a dash. If you found this information on multiple non-concurrent pages of the same source, you can separate the page numbers with commas. One rule to remember is that there will typically only be one period per footnote at the end of the footnote after the page number or final piece of information. All other sections are separated by commas or other punctuation. Next, let's insert a footnote or endnote for a journal article. This paper didn't originally cite any journals, so I've selected a relevant journal article for the purpose of this exercise. As before, we'll insert a note into the appropriate place by clicking our cursor at the end of the relevant sentence, and then clicking on the References tab, and then either Insert Footnote or Insert Endnote. Like before, we'll start with the author's first and last name, followed by a comma. Now, we'll list the title of the article. Unlike when citing a book, this title will not be italicized, but framed in quotes. After the title, place a comma inside the end quote. Now, we'll list the name of the journal the article was published in. Like with a monograph or book, the journal title is italicized. After the journal title, we'll include the volume number. Make sure to turn off italics. Then, list the issue number, making sure to separate it from the volume number with a comma. Chicago denotes the issue from the volume number by including the abbreviation for number, NO period. Not all journals will include issue numbers, so if you can't find one, just leave it out. After listing the issue number, we must next include the year of publication in parentheses, followed by a colon, and the page number of the information we are citing. If you found your journal in a non-digital format or in a PDF file not accessed online, you can end your note citation here with a period. However, since I found this article online, I need to include a few extra pieces of information. First, I must list the date I accessed or downloaded the document. and then either the DOI or the link where the document can be accessed. Feel free to remove the hyperlink automatically inserted by Word. To do this, right-click on the URL and click Remove Hyperlink. End the citation with a period. Unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss every type of footnote citation, but I've left a link in the description of this video to the Chicago Manual of Style website that lists almost every other type of document you may need to cite. Now, let's talk about truncated citation notes. When writing your paper, you'll probably need to cite a source more than once. When reciting a source that you cited most recently, you don't have to restate the author, document title, or publication information. Instead, Chicago instructs us to use an abbreviation of the Latin word ibidem, which means in the same place. When the reader sees this abbreviation, she or he will know to look to the previous footnote containing document information. Note that if you are citing a piece of information on the same page of the same document as you last cited, you don't need to restate the page number. However, if you are citing information from the same source but a separate page, you should state the new page number. Finally, if you cite a source multiple times non-concurrently, you also don't need to include all of the information included in the initial citation we constructed together. Instead, you should include only the author's last name, an abbreviated version of the title, and the page number on which you found the information. Now, let's move on to the bibliography. According to the Chicago Manual of Style, the bibliography should begin on its own page at the end of the document. Since some of us are using endnotes, we have to go through a small but specific process to make sure the bibliography begins after the endnotes. First, click to the left of the very last word of your document. Then, click on the Layout tab, and then the Breaks option in the upper right-hand corner of the Page Setup section. In the drop-down menu that appears, select Next Page in the Section Breaks area. Then, click on Insert and Page Breaks. Your screen should now jump to a new page at the very end of your document. To start, label your bibliography by typing Bibliography and centering it in the page. Your bibliography will include one entry for each of the sources cited in your foot or endnotes. Some instructors may also want you to include other sources that you consulted but did not refer to while writing. Now, let's walk through bibliographic entries for two of the most common types of documents, books and journal articles. Begin by listing the author's name. Because we're making an entry for a bibliography that will later be alphabetized by author's last name, make sure to list the author's last name first, followed by a comma, and then the first name, followed by a period. Next, we'll list the book title in italics like we did in the notes, but end with a period instead of a comma. Finally, we'll include the city of publication, followed by a colon, the publisher, a comma, and the year of publication. We'll end the entry with a period. Notice that the bibliographic entry for a book is very similar to the footnote or endnote format, but as a general rule, bibliographic entries use periods instead of commas to separate the different sections of a citation. Bibliographic entries for journal articles share even more in common with their corresponding footnotes. Aside from inverting the author's name, the only difference between the two is that periods replace some of the commas. First, begin by listing the author's name. Make sure to list the last name first, followed by a comma, and then the first name. Next, list the title of the article in quotation marks, ending with a period within the final quotation mark. Then, list the journal article in italics, followed by the volume number, a comma, the issue number, if it exists, and the year of publication in parentheses. After the year of publication, include a colon, and then list the page numbers of the entire article, not just the pages where you found the information you used. As with footnotes, unfortunately, I don't have time to show you how to format a bibliographic entry for every potential type of source, but I've included a link in the description of the video to the Chicago Manual of Style website that contains formatting instructions for additional source types. Now that we've populated our bibliography page with all our sources, we need to make sure that our sources are alphabetized so they can easily be located using the information listed in the notes above. To alphabetize your sources, click and hold your left mouse button to the left of your first entry and, while holding your mouse button, drag your cursor down the screen until it passes your final entry. Then, let go of the left mouse button and click on the alphabetize symbol in the paragraph section of the Home tab. A window labeled Sort Text should appear. Make sure that Paragraphs is selected from the first drop-down menu item and then hit OK. Your entry should now be alphabetized. Finally, we also have to implement a hanging or reverse indentation style for our bibliography page. So, before deselecting your text, click on the Paragraph menu Launch button in the bottom right-hand corner of the Paragraph section. Then, select Hanging from the Special drop-down menu. Hit OK.